What's up, guys? Welcome back to my channel. My name is Emma if you're new here, and I love to talk about all things Peloton cycling and fitness. So be sure to subscribe if you haven't already. I post every single Sunday, and today's video I'm doing another Peloton book review. They are really coming out fast now, and it seems like every instructor is writing a book. So today I will be reviewing Live, Learn, Love Well, Lessons from a Life of Progress, Not Perfection by Emma Lovewell. This book is not super new. It came out in May of this year, so in 2023. But one interesting thing to note, which I didn't notice before I started reading, is it actually has significantly less views than Tunde and Cody's book. Emma Lovewell's book rating is 3.75, while Cody and Tunde's are both over 4. And after reading the book, I kind of understand the rating. Emma did write that she wrote it on her own, or at least does not allude to there being a ghostwriter, and mentions that she was always passionate about writing for a lot. So you can assume that she wrote it herself, which kind of makes sense if the other instructors had ghostwriters. That obviously Emma can be a good writer, but she's primarily someone in the fitness space. So it kind of makes sense, but we'll get into my gripes. The description of this book is a memoir chronicling Emma Lovewell's incredible path to physical and mental fitness that traces her journey to becoming a beloved Peloton instructor and inspires readers to live, learn, and love well. I would personally give this book maybe a 2.5 out of 5. I did round up to a 3 out of 5 for my Goodreads rating. But yeah, I just thought that this was nothing special, and especially coming off of Cody's book, I feel like I left Cody's book with more of an idea of what he wanted me to think about when it was over, while Emma Lovewell's book, I am not really sure what she wanted me to think about while it was over. I felt that it was kind of hard to follow, and I didn't think that the advice was anything particularly great. Now, I don't think any of the Peloton instructors are writing amazing self-help advice, but hers particularly, nothing to think about now that this book is over. I did listen to this book. It is narrated by Emma Lovewell herself, which I do think is cool. I do think that these Peloton memoirs are a great listen. This one, I believe, was only 5 hours before I speeded it up. So it was a very quick listen, and while listening to it, it wasn't necessarily boring, but I do think there was a decent amount of filler, and I just think nothing stuck with me after the book ended. So it starts off, there is an introduction, and basically throughout the book, it chronicles her life. There is no dates at all in this book, so I do find it somewhat hard to follow. But she starts out, she's oh, I was instructor number 11 at Peloton. She's at her premiere ride, talking about how she's nervous. And then it kind of flashes forward to 5 years later when she's doing her 5-year anniversary ride with the same playlist that she did when she originally started at Peloton, and that she's less nervous essentially. I don't know what really the lesson was there, besides I think catering to Peloton fans and kind of getting people's attention right away. Then she kind of flashes back and starts talking about her parents, and I really did not know much about Emma Lovewell. She's definitely not an instructor that I gravitate towards, so I really did not know that she was half Taiwanese, but her mother is Taiwanese. Her father is white, born in America, and they met in New York City on a subway platform. Dad was a musician at that time, and the mom was going to college to be an accountant. And they fell in love, and the dad encouraged the mom to follow her artistic passions. So she stopped going to college for accounting, started taking oil painting classes, which upset her very traditional family, but I guess the mom is a rule breaker and kind of rebelled against them. And then they got married. They had Emma's older brother, Alan, and then they had Emma. And they moved back to Martha's Vineyard, which is where her dad grew up. That's where Emma was growing up. But Emma is oh, we're not rich, even though we grew up on Martha's Vineyard. We're the year-round people. And I kind of question that, but I guess it is her prerogative. She does talk about wearing secondhand clothes and growing their vegetables and stuff, but it's kind of unclear. I feel living on Martha's Vineyard, you still have to be kind of rich, but I could not know. So she does touch on that. Her dad was a reporter for the paper. Her mom was a stay-at-home mom who also did side jobs like substitute teaching. And Emma talks about how she learned a lot of her DIY skills and like gardening skills from her parents. And then she kind of wraps up this introduction with the message of like wellness is important. There is kind of like a lot of filler there, but yeah, just wellness is important. And then we get into chapter 1. And chapter 1, she introduces this like gardening analogy that's basically like life is like gardening. You need to like take care of your garden. You need to be constantly weeding out things that are bad for you. You also need to be intentional about what you put in it. And she started off with this analogy about gardening, and then she like explained how it links to your life as well. And it's like, you didn't need to explain the analogy. I got it the first time. I just feel like there was a lot of like filler in this. And then she switches back to the memoir part. I do feel like it's kind of chunky because she tries to do like life advice, self-help, and then also switch back to the memoir part. And I feel like it doesn't always go hand in hand. But she talks about taking out compost as a kid and not liking it. Then we fast forward a lot. She's moving to New York City, taking odd jobs, trying to make a career in dance. She talks about her first apartment that she just brought one plant and it like made her feel a lot more at home. And then moving into an apartment that had like a concrete backyard and her building like her first garden there, and like the triumphs and tribulations of a city garden that she had to like lug water to it. And, you know, it was hard to grow things there, and like having all these plants and dirt and like not knowing if her landlord would allow it. And I feel like it was a fine story. You might find it a little more interesting if you like really like Emma Lovewell, but I don't think it was anything like super interesting. She also mentions here is when she meets her partner, Dave, who is her current partner, and how he helped her a lot like grow out this garden. And then she wraps up chapter 1, going back to the garden analogy, just says like be intentional with your garden. And then we're on to chapter 2. Chapter 2 I thought was a little more interesting. She talks about how growing up, she always thought like kind of being quiet and just getting your work done was good, and like not creating problems at all was good, when sometimes like you need to advocate and like stand up for yourself. Then she fast forwards a lot, talks about going west to California with Dave, feeling adrift. She said she worked at a tech company as like a personal trainer, but it wasn't really fulfilling. She didn't see a lot of clients, I guess. And that this was like a really long commute as well. It just wasn't fulfilling. At that time, she was getting more trainer certification. So she was like working towards a goal, but it just didn't feel right. And before they moved to California, she had acted in a Peloton kickstarting video where like she was just the actor of the person on the bike. And Dave was like, hey, you should message Peloton and, you know, see if they have a job for you. So she did email them, and John Foley, the CEO of the time, emails back very quickly, but then she kind of leaves us hanging. I mean, we know what happens, but she rewinds a lot again, back to her childhood, talking about how she always really liked to lip sync because, I don't know, I feel like she could like let out her energy while still being quiet. And she talks about like loving Mariah Carey, picking out a Mariah Carey CD for her 9th birthday. And then I guess they saw Mariah Carey, it's kind of unclear what age, at a restaurant. And Emma went up to her and just like handed her a pad and paper for a signature, but didn't say anything. And how like she wished she could have been more vocal, but it kind of ties back to her always being really quiet. She also talks about participating in a lip sync competition at her school, nothing like super interesting. And then she kind of reaches her breaking point when she is at a party of some sort, and the woman that she's talking to makes a racist comment towards Chinese people, and she doesn't speak up, but her friend does and is like, Emma is Chinese. And after that, Emma just feels like really bad that she didn't say anything, and like realizes that she wants to advocate for herself and for her people more. And that leads to her talking about the racist attacks on Chinese people in New York City during COVID, and how she actually like spoke to our government about it to advocate for a bill to be passed. And yeah, I thought that was really cool. I did not know Emma Lovewell did that. I'm sure it was a big thing at the time, but I feel like I don't keep that close of an eye on her. So that was like really interesting to hear about. Then we are on to chapter 3, and Emma's talking about filming the first live studio ride since the pandemic. So it's like the pandemic is still happening. This is just her first ride back. And it gets very confusing here because she talks about how she was staying in like her friend's empty house, to not give Dave or his parents COVID, like if she was exposed to it by filming these rides. But it's just like never mentioned again. It was very hard to follow like when she was where, in my opinion, because there are no dates. But she never mentions like being alone again. But she does talk about this being like really, really lonely. And then she flashes back, talks about her first swimming lesson, how the first time she went, she like didn't want to even get in the water because it was cold. But then like the second time she got over it, and now she like really loves swimming. She talks about sailing lessons, which again, those kind of sound expensive, but she claims that her parents like really scrounged up the cash for it. And she went into some like boating competition and there was no wind, and her partner were like struggling, but then they just like caught a little bit of wind. And they were very slow, but they finished, and like she was really proud of herself. So I feel like this chapter was mostly about like, if you don't succeed at first, keep trying, or like don't give up. Then we jump more into the future where she was messaging John Foley, like we're going back to this story. And he referred her to Robin Arzon, and Robin Arzon basically talked to her and was like, we don't have any jobs, or we're like not hiring right now, but come audition anyways. So Emma flew to New York and auditioned. The audition cycling part was only 15 minutes, which I thought was interesting, but there was like a second day full of interviews. And she does mention that she sees Cody Rigsby during that time, and like he really hyped her up. And Cody mentions that in his book too. So it's like cool to see the connection there. And there were months of negotiation and contracts before the first live ride that she did. So that was interesting, but I don't feel like there was like a ton of insight to Peloton. I feel like this book actually had the least amount of Peloton stuff out of all the instructors so far. No real tea. And then she ends this chapter with like her daily routine, which is very basic. But one thing I thought was interesting is one of the things is don't go on your phone for at least 3 minutes when you wake up, which I feel like is not a lot of time to not go on your phone. Like I've read things that are like, oh, don't go on it for like the first half hour that you're up, but 3 minutes. I don't know. That was interesting. But besides that, it's like drink water, write down gratitudes, meditation, like very basic like morning routine. So then in chapter 4, we're going back to her past. Her mom and dad divorced when she was 12. It was like a huge surprise. The dad left Emma and her brother Alan a note on their pillows, which was like very traumatic. But Alan had read his note and then like told Emma, and yeah, that she was just very upset. And then a couple months later, it's kind of unclear because she doesn't really give any timelines in this book. Her dad brought Alan and her cookies, and Emma knew that there was another woman. She's like, you don't know how to make cookies. And she was right. It was confirmed that her dad left her mom for another woman. Her mom was heartbroken, and this strained Emma and hers relationship. I guess the mom was probably depressed, and they were more living like roommates than like family. Her brother had gone off to college, so it was really just Emma and her mom. And then another thing I did not know about Emma is when she was young, like in high school, she went to OBGYN and they found a lump in her breast that was not cancerous, but she needed it to be removed. And Emma just knew that her mom would like not be able to handle this information. So she called her dad, and this was like the first thing that really started to thaw their relationship, with him helping her and like driving her to appointment and surgeries to help her. And they actually found 2 more lumps in her breast that then had to be removed. But it seems like that like kind of happened and now everything is okay. Like it hasn't happened in a while, but just that her dad was really supportive throughout that. She also talks about writing a letter to her father about how he destroyed their family, and him replying that she was a really good writer and like should continue writing, and that he had always encouraged her to write. And she kind of wraps up this chapter saying she learned to appreciate her parents as like individuals, and although sometimes they come together as a family, just having a relationship with both of them. And even though she's forgiven her parents, she still has trust issues. Chapter 5 I thought was interesting. She talks about being half Asian and half white and her experience with that. So the first thing she talks about embracing weird things about her that were mostly just like Asian things. So like eating hot pot, having Chinese food in her bento box for lunch while all the other kids had like sandwiches. She talks about her friend coming to her house and her mom always making like traditional Chinese food, and her friend eating like a really spicy pepper and like dying because it was so spicy, and how Emma felt really embarrassed about it, even though like the friend was not upset at all. She also talks about when she was with her Asian relatives not feeling Asian enough because they spoke Mandarin. She says that she acknowledges that she is white passing, that she doesn't typically look Chinese, and how at restaurants, if she was out with her family, like the waiters would give her forks instead of chopsticks and she would have to ask for chopsticks. And then when she was with white people, she didn't feel white enough because, you know, she had this Chinese culture. And she says that being half Asian, half white really helped her have good self-reflection and learn about herself and like learn about her different cultures. So it's kind of a happy wrap to the chapter. Then we get into chapter 6, which is talking about her college experience, which is actually interesting. So she went to Amherst, Massachusetts, and she says she didn't want to go to state school, but she did because she got scholarships there. And yeah, she just thought that she like deserved better, especially growing up on Martha's Vineyard, where she was surrounded by extreme wealth, noticing that even if she worked as hard as the wealthy people, that they had more opportunities than her. When she first came to college, she really like did not engage with college. She didn't join extracurriculars versus like high school when she was in everything. She didn't care about her classes, but then she finally auditioned for the dance team, made it on, and like that was her first connection to the college and was a lot happier. And then she got dance-related internships in New York City, moving there for a summer and realizing like that's where she wanted to be. Then we're into chapter 6, where she briefly talks about like dance cardio at Peloton and how happy she is that like she got to be part of the crew that launched it, and talks about dancing with Usher, which I didn't know there was a class that Usher's dancing in. I should probably look for that, but yeah, just how she felt so lucky. And then she also kind of talks about before Peloton taking weird, odd dance jobs. She talks about doing flash mobs, like experiential dances. And then she talks about joining the circus for 2 months, which was really interesting. This circus gave out free beer to the people that came. So she's like, yeah, everyone was like drunk and super happy. The energy was super good. And it was like really, really fun. And she tries to bring that same energy to Peloton. Chapter 8, the message is basically say yes to things even if they're difficult. She talks about going to Chile with a travel company and like having to do a hike where like the oxygen levels decrease and like it was scary, but then you get to see really cool things, which I don't know, I feel like she probably could have found a better story than that. And then she flashes back to taking more odd jobs in New York City. She talks about responding to a Craigslist ad that's basically like, oh, like fitness photography. She goes, it paid $50. They weren't weird, which was good. And the photographer is like, oh, maybe you should like get more into this. The photographer then took like a portfolio for her, and she got signed with a modeling agency that really got her into the fitness industry. And I believe she said she was with them for 7 years. They got her like a bunch of good gigs. She listed a bunch, but it was like New Balance, Adidas, like very recognizable brands. And she also said she was a cycling instructor before Peloton. Her friend had called her up and got her a job somewhere. And that the main draw of that was that they offered healthcare. So she was like, sign me up. And then we flash forward again. She talks about being at a lake house for the pandemic upstate, which I am confused if this is like the same house she was alone in. It didn't seem like it. And how her cat would come out paddleboarding with her. That was a random story. Chapter 9, she goes back to the circus again and talks about how this was the first time she was like making money continuously, even though it was for 2 months. She wasn't paying rent. She had found someone to sublet her apartment, and the circus fed you and gave you boarding. So she really had like all that money saved up, and she's getting paid $1,000 a week. And then when the circus ended, it was around Christmas time. So she like bought all of her family members really nice presents. She was really excited. And then a couple months later, she had to ask her mom for cash because there were just no gigs. And that was the only time she asked money from her parents, but like realized, I guess, like the importance of saving money. And then we're back to her childhood. She talks about going to the mainland off of Martha's Vineyard once a year to do like a really big shopping trip because they couldn't afford the boutiques that were there. So they'd like go to a big mall, get clothes for the year. And yeah, this was also kind of a throwaway story in my opinion. I guess she like looks back on that fondly, but I didn't think it was particularly interesting. And then I guess it leads into buying her first house, which is what she talks about next, and how she never knew if she'd have the financial security to buy her house, and how like comparison is a thief of joy. Chapter 10, it kind of jumps around a lot. So she first talks about like the pros of meditation. Her mom was really into it, and then she got really into it. She talks about coming home from elementary school and how she was really upset about a bully, and her mom was like meditate on it and it made her feel better. Then she flips to being back in the city, and she is learning how to ride a motorcycle. She took a crash course and then bought a motorcycle from Craigslist. She first rode it around Brooklyn a lot, but then finally came into Manhattan, and she talks about being super overwhelmed and it was raining. But then she like breathed in and out and focused and got home. I feel like that was an okay story. And she was unsure if she wanted to keep it or not because it was hard to park and kind of like unwieldy. And then someone stole it from her, and she's like, okay, whatever. And then she's like, a couple years later, I starred in like a motorcycle ad. That was cool. Again, I just don't know what to really think about some of the things and stories that she says. Chapter 11 is definitely a sadder chapter. She talks about like doing mood rides at Peloton and that she was sad and like really wanted to emphasize that emotion and to like feel that motion, feel the feelings. And then I don't even know when this happened. It must have happened pretty quickly once she moved to New York, because this is before she met Dave. And based on the story, it seems like she met Dave pretty quickly. But she talks about dating Brad. When she met Brad, he was a year and a half sober, but she like really, really liked him, thought that he had a lot of vigor for life, and they started dating. And then a while into the relationship, Brad started disappearing a lot. It turned out he was relapsing. And essentially Emma would be alone and like not know where he was for several days straight, and eventually broke up with him. And then a couple months after she broke up with him, he died of an overdose. And she talks about how this was like really sad. She was very depressed and distraught. Her friends like had to come stay with her. And she eventually turned to yoga and therapy to like move through it. And she talked about Brad's death on her sad Peloton ride, and like how a bunch of people messaged her after and was like, thank you for talking about this. Chapter 12, Emma talks about her mom getting sick. She had a nosebleed that wouldn't stop bleeding. They went to a specialist. The specialist found that there was a cancerous tumor in her sinuses. So Emma moved home to live in Martha's Vineyard to keep her mom's gardening business alive, while her mom stayed with like a friend or a relative closer to the hospital in the mainland, like not on Martha's Vineyard. Because to get off Martha's Vineyard, you need to take a ferry. So like when she's getting treatment, she just needs to be closer to the hospital. And yeah, Emma just talks about like how hard it was. Dave and Emma had plans to move to Texas. So Dave went to Texas. Emma stayed in Martha's Vineyard for a summer. Her friends and family really rallied around her, and it seems like the treatment worked and like her mom is okay now, but just kind of Emma stepping up. And she also says that home is where your heart feels the fullest. Chapter 13 is all about it's okay if your goals change. She talks about going for a run in Martha's Vineyard, and it takes her like a really long time. She has to walk for a lot of it. And her mom still responded positively, like, oh, wow, you did 5 miles. And then Emma realized that, like, you know, that's still an accomplishment in itself. Goals can change. After her mom's treatment seemed to be fine, she moved to Texas to meet up with Dave. They were supposed to be working with a fitness company to help with expansion. And yeah, that company like failed basically pretty much as soon as Emma got there. She knew that they had to leave. But she does mention that their Texas house was really nice because it was like the same price as a New York City apartment, but obviously way bigger. And she also talks about going to a workout class in Texas and having a woman come up to her and being like, you can't only have a sports bra on, and how she like felt really embarrassed, but then she felt angry because this woman was like body shaming her. And that growing up, she didn't have a lot of like body image issues, that her mom was like really good about that. And then also living on Martha's Vineyard, she was like always in a swimsuit. And yeah, basically just says that like other people shouldn't comment on your body or make you feel bad, and like everyone should be confident. So after the Texas company failed, they moved to California. And then we get into chapter 14, which is kind of a flash forward again. And she talks about throwing a birthday party for her mom in her new house. So this is like kind of recent, and how they got a mariachi band and like all of her mom's friends were there, and her mom was so happy, and her mom was like, oh, this is like the best day ever. And Emma realized that if you like shift your mindset, you can have more best day evers. They don't need to only be like for special occasions. Her example is that like having a mundane day, but teaching your class well at Peloton, going to a new coffee shop that's really good, and like doing a workout class that you really enjoyed. That can be like, oh, this was like a really good day or like the best day. So just having like a more positive mindset. Then we're into chapter 15, which is kind of a throwaway chapter as well. She's basically just like, love yourself, treat yourself so that you give yourself something to look forward to, date yourself, enjoy alone time. I feel like this is very basic self-help advice. She does talk in this chapter about going out to dinner every Monday alone and like trying different noodles, which I think that was pretty cool, and how like you should resist the allure of the phone and just like enjoy being with yourself. And then chapter 16 is the wrap-up chapter. She talks about going on a trip to Japan that was like amazing, and then it ending, and that like there's no endings, there's just opportunities for what's coming next. It was kind of clear she didn't know how to end this book, because she's basically like, you know, this isn't my whole life, things will still happen, but I just need to like end it at some point. And then this book was over. I do feel like even in my summaries, it's kind of clear that you're just like jumping around so much, and I think that she tries to do it to like pique your interest, but at times I did find it very hard to follow. And yeah, some of the stories, like some of them are cute to listen to, but I feel like if you're not a huge Emma Lovewell fan, you could probably skip this book. While comparison with like Cody's book, I feel like is a little more interesting and has like more advice and is a little more funny, while Emma Lovewell's book is more like, here are random memories from my life. So it just depends what you like. It's not bad to listen to as a kind of like podcast, as an audiobook. I do think Emma is good at telling a story. It's just like, I don't know exactly what the meaning of the story is. So let me know if you've read this book. If so, what you think. I would be curious, and let me know what Peloton instructor book I should read next. There's so many now. But that is it for this video. I hope you guys are staying safe, having an awesome week, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye!